Auragami, unfolding spatial audio trends. So this is intended to be kind of a high-level view of what's out there in terms of spatial audio, as well as what Virginia Tech is doing, and in particular CHCI and ICAT. And what I'm here to do is to help you all use studio spaces like the one I'm in and the technologies I'm going to talk about. I'm Tanner Upthegrove, the immersive audio engineer at ICAT, and I wanted to start with this quote that I heard many years ago by George Lucas. Sound is 50% of the movie-going experience. And while we're not talking about movies exactly, we've all experienced the magic and immersion of being in a film and just being in part of that world. And sound is so important to that for a variety of reasons. Number one, if it's wrong or if it's off, you'll know right away and it breaks the illusion. Number two, it can enhance the experience. So you think about Star Wars and George Lucas, he was talking a lot about the sound design and the sound effects, which were incredibly novel for the time, what that added to the experience. I'm thinking more about the systems and approaches to these things. So as we move forward, I'll be talking less about the specific sounds, but the presentation of them and what that means. So going back to the title, Auragami, if you've worked in the audio world like I have, where I come from, doing stereo music production, you might see this every day. This is a multi-track recording software, and you can record in your audio files and have a whole bunch of them, and you sum them down to 2 channels, typically, for stereo. Stereo is amazing. No diss on stereo, but there's so much more out there now. So we're taking stereo and we're going to unpack it back out, unfold it back out into this amazing thing called spatial sound. And the really amazing thing is us, the human being. Our hearing, our sense of hearing is incredible. Everybody has a unique head shape and unique pinna. That's these things on the side of your head. And your brain can figure out where sounds come from, what kind of sounds are important, and parse different sounds. And all this comes down to your unique head shape, your shoulders, everything, the way that sound interacts with you. There's one term here that I'll call out called interaural time difference, and that's one really important effect. Imagine a sound wave moving through space towards your left ear, and then it hits your right ear later. That's the way your brain can tell where a sound comes from. It knows by the difference between the ears. Also, if you're like me and you've been to a lot of concerts, make sure you wear hearing protection, because once you have hearing damage, it's irreversible. Some other really good things the human ear is capable of. We're great at understanding temporal things, for example, melodies, call and response music. Our spatial hearing is really good. And what that means, if you imagine a circle around your head, a 360-degree circle, the human ear can localize or pinpoint where the sound comes from with about a 5-degree level of accuracy. So as long as it's around your head, you could point to where a sound source is coming from very, very easily. We're great at source separation. Recent studies showed that even in a crowded conversation, the human brain can tack on to 3 distinct conversations and ignore the rest, which is an incredible feat. How well you might remember that conversation is a different matter, but hearing 3 different things and being able to track them is a phenomenon of the human ear and brain. And then, like I mentioned before, we're great at hearing anomalies in sound. Anything that ruins the sound experience or sounds out of the normal, our brain is so good at detecting that you think about it in terms of digital audio, where there's 48,000 samples happening in 1 second. If one of those samples is off, we can notice. So a little more about the application of this. We're talking about spatial hearing now. We can hear sounds from all around us. There's different kinds of sounds that we experience. We want to take that and bring it into the spatial audio technology domain beyond stereo. So we're going to start with this thing called binaural. And binaural functions a similar way to stereo. Typically with binaural listening, you're going to wear headphones. They cover your ears. And then there's this special function that the sound runs through called a head-related transfer function. These 2 diagrams show how it's captured or how it could be captured and kind of what it means. The one on the bottom left, imagine if you had two tiny microphones in your ear that could capture the sound. You could have a sound source like a speaker playing a sound, and the two microphones, you could measure the difference of their time of arrival or interaural time difference, which we looked at earlier. This is something that on the right, if you want a true head related transfer function for yourself, you have to sit in this room like that picture. It's called an anechoic chamber. That means that no sound can come in from the outside, and any sound generated in the inside dissipates with no reverberation. And then there's an array of loudspeakers. That's what that circular thing is at very specific angles. And you sit in that room for a long period of time, and sound comes out from each one, and they measure the difference between the two microphones that are in your ear. From that, you can generate a personalized head-related transfer function, which works great on headphones for you. Let's listen to sort of an example of that in Reaper. We're going to listen to first a stereo effect. So I'm going to play a noise, a pink noise. It kind of sounds like rain or water. Bypass that. And what you just heard is the sound moving from left to right in your speakers. That is stereophonic panning, amplitude panning. Let's go into the spatial domain now. I'm going to take that same sound source and encode it into a 3D sound format called ambisonics. So imagine that sound is this white dot. And you could probably hear it doing a similar effect as the amplitude panning, maybe a little more smeary, because it's simulating your own head-related transfer function. One important thing to note here is I'm taking that sound and running it through a processor called a binaural renderer. So the sound comes in here, and it turns it back into stereo sound or binaural using the head-related transfer function. And in this software, we have this thing that says use default HRIR. So that's where you could take your individualized profile and put it in
No,
there.
just based on my error submission. Yeah, just revising the intro.
I don't think that audio was part of my presentation, but we could spatialize it. And from there, you could decode it to yourself. It's really complicated to get that individualized measurement. So oftentimes we're using this default one or a generalized one, which is not going to work great or definitely not perfect for everybody, but it gives you that impression of movement. So a lot of this technology in the past 10 years has come about because of the pushes from VR, AR, and XR. Early on, if you used Oculus, you might remember they had these little dinky headphones that would go over your ears, or you'd wear headphones if you wanted immersive audio with it. What's happened is we've seen a migration towards sound devices that do not cover your ear. There's been more emphasis on AR experiences where you're not completely isolated and you could merge these different audio technologies together. So now you can hear the real world with your ears uncovered by headphones, as well as the spatial audio from AR and many VR devices, which have a small speaker array built into them or speakers built into the side. One really neat technology to point out here, bone conduction headphones. So Dr. Raphael Patrick, who was introduced earlier, he and I collaborate and he studies these a lot. There's a lot of potential for these because they don't make an acoustic signal that transfers through the air. They rest on the bones, usually on your head or part of your body, and shake them gently. And it has the same effect as an acoustic transmission to your ear. So there's a lot of new research happening about how can we integrate these devices into, say, a head-worn device and not have any acoustic transmission. A really important factor for having personalized head-related transfer functions or spatialized audio is head tracking and rotation. If you can track the movement of your head, that head-related transfer function will respond because of those 360-degree measurements. That's going to give you probably the most important characteristic of spatial audio, being able to move your head natively and feel like things move around. A lot of the devices we use have that built in, or you can use external trackers and bring it into the software. In fact, the software we were looking at earlier has a data inlet specifically for that, so you could do live head rotation. Other cool features, active acoustics, whether there's a microphone array built into these devices, it can do active noise cancellation, or even I think the new Apple Vision Pro does acoustic ray tracing live. So you can scan a room acoustically and get some kind of model of what the room is like, either to de-reverbate, take the reverb out of the sound, or do other noise cancellation. So one thing I've kind of noticed throughout the years is has spatial computing kept up with the visual counterparts? There's been a lot of emphasis on visual and auditory, not always as much, but we're kind of at a point where it's really impressive and the tools are accessible and somewhat easy to use. So more about the spatial technologies, but we're going to move away from kind of this personalized head-worn system and about the human head to a more objective type of presentation system. The picture on the bottom right is 13 years old. You're looking at the Cube when we installed a 124 channel spatial audio system. Once you get outside of the headphone spatial audio presentation type of world, typically you're going to need a lot of loudspeakers. Some benefits for this kind of system include a social and objective interaction. So instead of having your own worn device, now you can walk into a room like the Cube and have a consistently objective spatial audio presentation every time. And you can bring your friends. I want to touch on a couple terms here, immersive and spatial. And my personal definitions of these have to do with the kind of format of sound you're using and maybe the kind of content you're playing. So I think when we think about spatial audio, I would define that as an attempt to recreate an accurate acoustic scene or a auralization of a scene in a way that represents reality or a virtual version of a thing like a virtual twin. And immersive, I think of it more as, say, surround sound in a movie theater, or if you've experienced an interactive art exhibit, there may not be an array of speakers like you see in the Cube or the one behind me, but there may be speakers strategically located to give you a sense of immersion in that world. I think one thing spatial is really moving towards, spatial audio in particular, is creating this realism and presence with highly efficient ways of doing it. Um, and this applies to the worlds of simulation and training. So if we can move from having a simulation and training scenario with, maybe one or two loudspeakers in the room to present the signals and just things like loudness to a more fully immersive environment, we think that can improve some of the accuracy of the simulation, um, and the performance of those that are in it might improve as well. Next, we're going to look at a novel controller. So one really great thing about this spatial audio experience is you have another dimension of control, whether you're looking at it from, say, a simulation and training perspective, or from a creative and artistic perspective, like this one. Sorry, we'll get to the novel controllers video in just a moment. Here's a few more spatial audio systems on different scales to get an idea. This is the Tesseract. that we're looking at. It's also, I'm inside of the Tesseract. This picture is from the Taubman Museum of Art a few years ago when the Commonwealth Cyber Initiative sponsored a sonification project using spatial audio. We took cybersecurity data and turned it into sound. This is a very intimate, small scale one, but the idea here is not everybody has a cube or can visit the cube in Blacksburg. So we can take this out. We can take it to schools or art exhibits or anywhere and have an experience that you can't have other places. Here's some more systems for scale. The gallery space one is the Virginia VCU Institute for Contemporary Art Gallery. This was an opening piece in there where Stephen Vitello, a artist at VCU, and I took the stories of Jorge Luis Borges and spatialized them into a 30-minute experience where the voices would move around you and tell you one of the stories. And on the top right is a picture from Moogfest from 2017 when I brought down some, my poor back. There are like 25 loudspeakers and that truss tower, and Dr. Mike Rohn, who was at Virginia Tech at the time, and I set this up, and we had talks and presentations and concerts. What's on the bottom is what happened a couple years later. This was a spatial audio system designed in collaboration with Meyer Sound at the Armory in Durham, and it's about a 500 person venue. Uh, and we ended up installing almost 30 loudspeakers, really big ones in this venue, and worked with artists over several months, um, sometimes in the cube, sometimes remotely, to make their work for the space. So they're used to going back to the stereo world to a music festival or a concert or a show. The sound engineer will help you get on the big PA, and the PA is usually at the front. Sometimes there's side fills. And the sound is, if you're like me, you're standing right next to the PA, like, yeah, this is awesome. And the sound is blasting your face. But this gives both artistic and experiential differences where it doesn't have to be sound always coming from the front. You can have sounds coming from any direction, but also have this distributed array where it doesn't have to mean that the front sound speakers are the biggest, loudest things ever. Next, let's move to a kind of medium large venue. This is a really low res rendering from the architectural plan of Michigan State University's Eichler Hall. They're retrofitting it with a 144 channel loudspeaker array for ambisonics. This is inside of a acoustic modeling software called Ease. Each of those loudspeakers was plotted in the real room with the acoustic properties of the room. And here we can take some real measurements, spatial measurements about how the acoustics will perform in the space. So this is a top-down view of that room. Again, each one of those little boxes is a loudspeaker pointing at the middle. So now you can sit in the middle of the room and have your mullet swayed by the wind like me instead of being at the front by the PA. And this shows, sorry, my zoom window is blocking here, the potential loudness of this whole system. So we can look at things like how loud is it going to be? We can predict that. We can also look at things like what is the overlap of the loudspeakers with certain tolerances of sound loudness? And that becomes more important for things like spatial audio, where you need to have the sound arrive at a central point and have a plan for that, so that later you can compensate for their differences in location. So we've looked at some of the presentation systems. Now let's look at some of the ways we can capture and produce spatialized audio. On the bottom right, there's Mike Rohn again. We're at Lane Stadium at a homecoming game. It was full and it was crazy. We recorded with that spatial sound field microphone on the right. It's what's called a first order sound field microphone. There's 4 microphones built into it. Quarter for scale. We also had a calibrated sound level meter, and we recorded what it's like to be on the field. And I'll tell you, the athletes have it really rough. It's like it can get over 110 dB. It can get super loud, like having a jet engine next to your face. So imagine trying to talk to your teammate with all that going on. It's unbelievable. So this is one avenue of exploration. These large public venues, we can start capturing the sound, not only how loud is it, but also directional information. When we play this back in the cube, you can very clearly hear there's the band. Oh, there's the student section. Oh, there's somebody right behind me, and she sounds like she's very sick. Maybe she's had too much beer, uh, screaming her guts out. But you can pick out these details in a very computationally cheap format that scales very well to different systems, whether it's headphones or a loudspeaker array. So how does that work? We looked at the microphones. Oh, and the microphone on the left is now one in our studios. This is called an eigenmic. It's a 64 capsule microphone that can capture high order ambisonics, a high degree of fidelity. That's capturing real sounds from the world, and then we can play them back. But what if we have generated sounds or sounds that we couldn't capture with the sound field microphone? Let's take a look at how that might work. So I'm going to point out I've got this on the top right, a visualizer that's going to show the acoustic energy in this ambisonic 3D sound format. Imagine the sound is this virtual sphere and you're right in the middle of it. Sound will move all around and come closer and farther away. This map only shows the perimeter, so just imagine that as the perimeter, but there are others that can show a more true 3D field. First, I'm going to play a sound field recording of some machinery in a factory. And while it's not an incredibly interesting recording, there's details that your brain is looking for. There's room reverberation. You can hear the acoustics of the room that are baked into the capture. There's some directionality to that machine. It sounds to me like it's coming from sort of the front right. Again, that was a natively captured sound field mic, but let's say that you don't have that. Here's an example of a truck with a backup beeper. And on the bottom right, I'm going to live encode it. I'm going to take that sound in real time, put it into that ambisonics 3D space. So you can use almost any plain audio file and put it into this ambisonics 3D sound domain. I'm really interested in the ambisonics format. It's computationally inexpensive. It's easy to use. And now there are so many free open source tools available. In fact, I'm using 3 different developers' tools in this demonstration that you can get for free, including their publications and code. So that it's great. It's out there. It's relatively easy to use, and it works. So let's go back to our talking about ambisonics a little bit. I'm sorry, this slide was misplaced. I want to show this one because this is, earlier I mentioned novel controllers. This is a fun project we did that uses embedded motion tracking, and this is a theater game. Our team thinks that theater and video games are usually one and the same. They have broad overlap. So this is a team game where If the ball went out of the invisible maze, then the sound stopped or the sound changed. And yes, that was a giant inflatable uh, raspberry that you can get inside and roll down a hill. All right, moving on to this sort of ambisonics thing and the computation work behind it. Um, there are other formats and other techniques for sound spatialization out there. This one, again, I'm picking on because I would say that it's been widely adopted in industry and practice, and it's highly scalable and easy to work with. This ambisonics thing has the directionality of sound baked into it. Again, imagine it's a sphere and you can put sounds anywhere inside the sphere. What this chart on the bottom right is showing is ambisonics is based on spherical harmonics. And in practice, when you have microphones and speakers, this means additive and subtractive phase cancellation. Spherical harmonics has these different orders, and that's why the diagram gets more complex as you go down. The single sphere is zero order, or imagine if you had one microphone that's omnidirectional, it picks up sounds coming from any direction, but it can't infer what direction it came from. The second one is a first order, and what we've been looking at and hearing is mostly first order. That's that four capsule microphone. It can infer X, Y, and Z information. And then the orders get higher and higher. Now, there's a couple things going on here. One, I would equate this, maybe it's not a great metaphor, but if you remember HD TVs being 1080p and now TVs are 4K, this is a resolution of pixels, right? How many pixels are packed into your TV? For ambisonics, it's a similar concept, but it's not exactly the same. What a higher order ambisonic microphone or playback will give you is a higher degree of precision in terms of localizing sources in 3D space. We'll look at this with the visualizer in a moment. I do want to point out that there are caveats to this. Number one being sound. Sound is interesting in how it works in our environment. High frequency sounds are more laser-like, and low frequency sounds are more lantern-like in how they move. A high frequency sound has high directionality, a low frequency sound has low directionality. So as you go to these higher and higher orders, you may have to infill with lower frequency content. What does that look like in practice? Let's take our truck example again. I just love this truck, so I use it all the time. Watch this visualizer. We are looking at a 7th order resolution. If we drop it down to first order, that backup going again here. You'll notice that the illuminated area is more generic. It's more just like a circle. If we go back to 7th order, it creates more of a fractal effect. So that's really representative of kind of how it's working. The lower orders are going to be more smeary and non-localizable sound, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. And you can also mix and match these together. Even this software suite, you can have a high order and a lower order decoder at the same time and blend them. You can have it all. Some other really important computational things happening with ambisonics, auralization. So we looked at the Michigan State Eichler Hall earlier. We can take that 3D model from a computer and generate what's called an auralization, or this is what this room will sound like. And there's degrees of accuracy around that, which are beyond the scope of this talk. Also, sonification, turning data into sound. So there's a lot of effort in taking different types of data, turning it into sound for informational purposes. And there's so many contexts. What spatial audio can now offer is ways to provide more vantage points, more perspective for that. So going back to the Auragami idea, taking stereo audio or mono audio and unfolding it, you can have a lot of these data sets happening aurally around you at the same time. And because the human brain is good at identifying sound, it can be a highly effective way to pick sounds out of a complex data set or anomalies. Think back to Tony's talk earlier. If you're an air traffic controller, the visual fatigue you must have looking at all these screens all the time. Is there any way we could add data sonification to reduce their visual stress, other stresses? Would that even work? What if you could take some of that flight data and turn it into sound? And when there's an anomaly, there's an alert. One really cool thing about this ambisonic stuff is impulse response and convolution workflows. So this has been used for a long time. If you want to capture the acoustic flavor of a room, you can use what's called an impulse response measurement. And there's two parts of this. There's a sound source that activates the acoustic energy of the room and a receiver that captures it. You may have seen folks do this before by popping a balloon or clapping or using other techniques like generating a sine wave sweep with a dodecahedral loudspeaker that spreads the sound out evenly in every direction. And then there's the device that captures it. Again, typically we've been seeing single microphones doing this, but you can use the sound field microphones we looked at earlier to capture this impulse response. And then you have a truly 3D acoustic representation of a real space. You can take the sounds we looked at earlier, like the truck, and process it through that, but with a process called convolution. And then that truck will sound like it's in that environment, it's in that space. There's even a lot of work going into generating these impulse response measurements live in real time for virtual environments. So you could totally have computer generated ones changing on the fly in real time. Uh, Again, my argument about ambisonics being sort of the dominant spatial sound format, the acoustic prediction softwares are all using it. The one I showed you earlier uses it. If you've ever watched 360 video on YouTube or created content for it, you can upload ambisonic formatted audio to it. They still use first order ambisonics to date, but I've heard plans of going to offering higher order ambisonic playback in the future. Dolby Atmos, I would consider that somewhere between immersive and spatial audio, but this is a format that's popped up everywhere and is very common. So you can play back your spatial audio work on it. Likewise, some of the Apple, I forget what they're called, earbuds have spatial audio context, including the rotation and head tracking built in. And finally, noise cancellation, having these microphone arrays, you can capture sound and process it using things like time difference of arrival. So a lot of application here by having these sort of dense acoustic systems all over the place. So what are some things we should be thinking about and other considerations for this stuff? For me, one is always privacy and security. You know, having microphones on board all of our devices all the time, and how do we have ownership over our content and our privacy is a huge question. So it doesn't help when I'm talking about putting microphones and speakers all over the place. So this is something that definitely needs more discussion. Integration with AI workflows is also really interesting. There's an incredible amount of work coming out right now looking at things like using AI to combine HRTF data sets into more generalized ones that will be more effective. There are commercially available softwares that use AI. I know we've used one here called Sound Particles, where it's for sound design. You can put in a few sounds and it will take them and spatialize them, multiply them. It can even analyze visually what's happening and try to adapt and adjust for you. So there's a lot of assistive things that can happen. Another in particular, this one's super creepy. We've used 11 Labs for a project with the National D-Day Memorial Foundation to generate voices that, people that aren't alive anymore. But also there was a poet that led the through line of our story. And that poet read his poem about D-Day and was captured uh, at the memorial. And he was also a voice narrator for I don't remember the show. It's a History Channel show or something. I can't remember right now, but so there were samples of his voice. And between having a performer read the poem the way we wanted it to fit with the bigger piece and using the 11 Labs software, it could sound just like him. And there's a huge ethical concern there. Absolutely. We we did this with the blessing of the family, of his family and estate. So that was all part of the discussion. We didn't just take his voice without asking. But I think these are the kinds of examples where you can start imagining how powerful this could be in a spatial context. Another big consideration is this stuff is expensive. It's not cheap to have a lot of loudspeakers. So, at Virginia Tech, we have many studios with a lot of technology in them. So we're trying to fulfill our land grant mission of getting as many folks to use them as possible. The the nice thing, I think I've stepped through a few ways where you can do this work without having 100 loudspeakers. You can do this on headphones. You can do this on a four-channel system in your home. So it's getting easier to do it. And then finally, there's real life concerns. My wife hides all of my cables in my house. They're just everywhere all the time. But if you have a 64 channel microphone, that's a lot of cables. So thinking about new technologies for the data, the sensing and the data transport are really important. The 64 channel microphone we looked at earlier has a network audio protocol built into it. So you can plug in one Ethernet cable, it gets the power, and the 64 channels all go over one Ethernet cable. Finally, my shameless self-promotion. If you liked any of this stuff and you want to go more in depth, first of all, just, reach out and find me. Um, we'd have, we as in Dr. Eric Lyon and I have a workshop this summer. It's our second spatial audio tide pool where we'll go way, way in depth over a 3-day kind of classroom instructional hands-on session about the different technologies and methods to do this work. And then there's 3 days after that of 10 to 12 hour intensives where you rotate through Virginia Tech studios and try it out. So if you're interested in either or both of those, let me know and I'll tell you more about it. And that concludes my talk. Thank you.